beloved community member, a successful businessman, and an unassuming villain. This was one of the worst serial killers in the US of all time. This is the life and story of the killer clown, John Wayne Gacy. Welcome and welcome back to Just Another Mystery, where we cover true crime, cold cases, cults, and mystery. So if that sounds like your jam, make sure you are hitting the subscribe button. Disclaimer before we go into this story will have scenes of a violent nature. There are scenes of violence and of a sexual nature. So if this is not your video, then skip right on to the next one. And I hope to see you soon. But otherwise, we will start diving straight in. So who was John Wayne Gacy? Let's talk about his early life and his family. John Wayne Gacy was born in March 17th, 1942, which makes him a Pisces. Unfortunately, John's father was an alcoholic and very abusive. His father would hit him and say that he was too soft because he loved his mother more. He used to cling on to his mother, and he generally was a bit softer than was acceptable in the 1940s, 1950s. Unfortunately, from a very young age, John showed an interest in sadism and was actually found assaulting a girl when he was just 7 years old. His father was the one who found him. His father then beat him to a very extreme situation as his father saw the assault happen. Unfortunately, at 7 years old, John also started to become assaulted. Now, this was a cycle of violence and abuse to John and John outwards. It's fair to say John was a very traumatized child and overall had not had a loving and caring upbringing, mostly due to his own father. In 1960, at just 18, John became a member of the Democratic Party. He was assistant precinct member. Now, for us in the UK, this actually means nothing, but it's basically like you had the captain of the area, and then you had their assistant. So John was the assistant. He was second in line to supporting the Democratic Party in his area. Now, this caused further unrest with his father because his father thought that the Democratic Party was soft. So he consistently called John a pansy and was making it very clear that he thought that John was weak and not able to succeed in life. In 1962, at just 20 years old, John actually ran away. He wanted to get away from his father, and he basically got in his car and he drove. But John was actually quite a smart cookie. In 1963, he finished in the Northwestern Business University and he got a job as a salesman immediately after. It's how you know it was the 1960s, because he got a job. Now, Gacy at this time was working as a salesman and started having a bit of a fling with one of his colleagues. Marilyn Myers and John Wayne Gacy were an instant hit. They fell for each other quite fast. And after just 1 year of working together in 1963, they got engaged, and after 6 months, they got married. Now, Marilyn and John were seemingly very, very happy. Marilyn's father had just bought 3 KFC chains. Now, her father then gave John an opportunity to manage one of the new restaurants. And by doing this, he had a little step up and he was able to use his business skills, and he was doing very, very well. So well that Gacy decided that he would set up a club in their basement of their own home. Now, this club would have alcohol, it would have drugs, and basically he would invite all of the employees over, and he would be like, oh, you know what, we're going to go and have a party night. We'll have a party night at my club. And it's basically in his basement with just the employees. Now, John was known to make advances on his employees, whether it was just a simple innuendo or he was getting a little bit touchy. If people accepted his advances, they would often sleep together, especially as he targeted the younger employees. He seemed to have a type, and it was men in general. Now, if someone battered off his affection and his attempt at getting with them, John used to make an excuse and say that he was testing their moral compass and making sure that they were of strong and sound values. Marilyn and Gacy had 2 children, and they were 1 year apart. So one was born in 1966 and one was born in 1967. So they had only been married for 4 years and had 2 children and were living very happily. They had a standard family. John's father had finally said to him that he was proud of him because he was managing a store and he had a wife and he had 2 children. He was overall very successful in the eyes of the normal person. But in August of 1967, only a few months after the birth of his second child, John spoke with a young man called Donald Voorhees. Now, Donald was only 15 years old, and John said to him, hey, you know, if you come to the club, I've got stag films. Now, stag films are naughty films that were called stag films in the 60s, and as a 15-year-old boy, Donald probably should have thought this was weird, but he didn't. And he thought, you know what, this guy is actually really cool. And John was also very charming. You've got to remember, he was a salesperson. He's been a manager. He's got a position of power that other people did not have. So Donald agreed to go to the basement in John's club and to watch this stag film. Now, as they were sitting on the sofa watching the stag film together, which actually is pretty weird in itself, John convinced Donald to perform oral tasks on him, and John also performed tasks on Donald. Now, John's explanation for this was that Donald should be with a man before he was ever with a woman. But remember, Donald is only 15. Donald was quite frightened after this and didn't initially report it to anyone. During this time, Gacy kind of gained traction and continued to abuse several youths that were working within KFC. And he got away with it. No one was reporting him. No one was speaking out. John felt like he had hit the jackpot in a certain sense because he was a manager, he had a position of authority, and suddenly he had all these young boys working for him that in the time of the 1960s, no one would openly say that they had engaged in gay acts if they were not openly gay. So he had found this horrible cycle of secrets that he could abuse. But eventually, in March of 1968, Voorhees actually gained the courage to tell his dad what had happened. Donald's dad, luckily, informed the police straight away. And the police went over to John and arrested him on the charge of oral sodomy and an attempted assault on a young boy named Edward Lynch. Now, as Gacy was in custody and was being held on criminal charges, he was behind bars. But Gacy, throughout this time, denied the claims and offered to do a polygraph test. Now, the ironic element is that he did the polygraph test and he failed miserably. He was deemed to be untruthful during the entire interview, and the polygraph test that he had asked for went against him. During his lockup, John Wayne Gacy unfortunately spoke to one of his other employees and promised them $300, which in 1968 was a heckload of money, to go and beat up Voorhees. Now, this employee's name was Russell Shredder. Russell Shredder actually agreed. Russell lured Voorhees to the car park, and then he maced him in the eyes and beat him up as much as he could. Luckily, Voorhees managed to run away and went and told the police everything straight away. Rightly so, Russell was immediately arrested, and whilst he denied anything initially, after a little while, Russell actually owned up to what John Wayne Gacy had done and how much money had been promised to him. On November 7th, 1968, Gacy pleaded guilty on one count only, relating to Voorhees, and John was sentenced to 10 years in prison. What made this even worse was that John Wayne Gacy had a psychiatric evaluation, and this evaluation deemed him to be a danger to society. And you would think that this would be the end of the story, but unfortunately, it's not. On the date of his sentencing, his wife, rightly so, handed him divorce files, and he was divorced and she got sole custody of the children, and he never saw Marilyn or his 2 children ever again. Now, John actually thrived in prison, and within months, John was the head chef in the kitchen. He was doing really well and was a model prisoner. During this time, he also gained traction within like a prison union, and this union grew from only 50 people to over 650 people. If that's not a testament to his charm and his ability to convince people to do anything, I don't know what is, because that was a growth of over 1,000% on this community. Because John was being such a model prisoner, he applied for parole in 1969. Now, this was just 1 year after his initial incarceration, and obviously he was denied because he was within 1 year. But this is when things turned, because in 1970, just 18 months after being incarcerated, he applied for parole again, but this time it was accepted. Now, this meant John Wayne Gacy was free after being deemed a danger to society and for being imprisoned on such a heinous crime. John Wayne Gacy went free in 1970 with a probation of only 1 year after completing only 18 months in prison. Now, this meant that his entire sentence, including probation, was only a quarter of what he was supposed to have received. Gacy claimed to fellow inmates that he wanted to fix his life in Waterloo, and he was going to come out and he was never going to get arrested again, and he was going to be the best version of himself. Within 24 hours, John Wayne Gacy left for Chicago to go live with his mother. He got a job as a line cook straight away, and in 1971, within a year of being released, John Wayne Gacy was arrested again as a claim of a boy being lured into a car came about. Now, this boy reported it to police. John Wayne Gacy got arrested. However, when the trial date came, the boy refused to show up in court. So the only reason John Wayne Gacy was not arrested at that time again was out of a technicality. During that year, in 1971, Gacy also set up a company. It was a construction company, and it was an immediate success. He was so successful straight away and was gaining clients left, right, and centre. In 1972, Gacy became engaged to Carol Hoff, who he had recently dated in high school, but they rekindled their connection, and they were engaged. Now, during this time, his employees were just growing in base, and he was having so much success within the construction industry. It was a great time. His father then reached out to him and said, I'm really proud of you. He even apologized for how he was to him as a child and said that he was really proud of how he had turned his life around. Unfortunately, most of Gacy's employees were propositioned for sex by Gacy. If you think construction, you had a lot of young boys working there and getting their first jobs. But Gacy kept an incredibly proper public front and lived a seemingly perfect suburban life. He was the businessman, he was recently engaged, he had turned his life around, and the public really thought that Gacy was an amazing, amazing person. So these employees were very scared to speak out. As you can imagine, they had a powerful man as a boss with all the relationships that they didn't. In January of 1972, Gacy lured Timothy McCoy into his club. Timothy was only 16 and they had sex. In the following morning, Gacy saw Timothy standing at the door with a knife in his hand. Now, Gacy saw this and thought that Timothy was trying to kill him. And in that kind of motive, Gacy lunged at Tim and took the knife off of him and continued to stab him. According to Gacy, this was the time that he found that murder was the ultimate thrill for him. After looking around following Timothy's murder, he realized that Timothy had only been standing in the doorway with a knife because he had just made breakfast. This, unfortunately, was John's first kill out of many. The same year, on a completely dystopian and opposite side of John, he got married to Carol. So he had started killing, no one had noticed, and he got married to Carol. So he was living like a double life. He had this suburban businessman on one side and the secretive murderer and assaulter on the other side. And it was just incomprehensible that this could be the same person. Now, several of his murders had very similar aspects, and in 1972 he also killed a boy named John Butkovich. He would trick them into putting on handcuffs and pretending like he was going to show them a magic trick, and then he would strangle them. Now, this became a bit of a pattern, and it was something that John Wayne Gacy even admitted to enjoying more than the other ways. Apparently, the other methods were boring. This was his preferred method. Now, John Butkovich's parents were so suspicious of John Wayne Gacy that they called the police over 100 times, and the police were like, "We have nothing here. We can't search him. What are you talking about?" But his parents were right. In mid-1970s, 2 more allegations of assault came up with young boys against John Wayne Gacy. But the police, again, did nothing. In 1975, Carol had had enough of these allegations and actually filed for a divorce. During this year, John Wayne Gacy actually also applied to be a Jolly Joker. Now, this is where him being a clown comes into the story, because he became a clown for hospitalized children in a way to cheer them up. Now, him being a clown had nothing to actually do with what he did in his secondary persona, but instead, the clown was part of his businessman upfront. So not only now was he successful suburban businessman, yes, he was divorced, but he also did charity work for children. I mean, how bad can this man be? Surely this man could not do any evil. And the community completely bought into this. In 1978, according to Gacy, his crawl space actually was so filled up with the people that he had killed, he needed to start dumping them in rivers. So he started to use the DePayne River that was only a few miles down the road. But still, this didn't lead to him being caught. In fact, he was still getting away with it. So you can imagine how many people he had gotten away with at this point in time that no one had even questioned, and no one was looking at him because he was this model citizen who did charity work, had a successful business, had children, was literally a clown going to events to cheer people up. No one would have believed what had happened. In December 11th of 1978, a young boy named Robert Piest, who was only 15 years old, told his parents he was even going to John Wayne Gacy to have an interview for his construction company. Now, when Robert never returned, his parents got worried and filed a missing persons report with the police. Now, this report labelled that Robert had gone to meet with John Wayne Gacy for an interview. And rightly so, the police went to John and started to ask where Robert was. Had he seen him? And John denied knowing anything about Robert. But the police went through and searched his property anyway. During the search, they found a pistol, hypodermic needles, and pornographic films. Their initial search did not find anything of note, so they kept watching him. And when they managed to do a secondary search, they found a receipt that belonged to Robert. And John Wayne Gacy had refuted noting Robert, which already made this suspicious. So they continued searching the house based on this newfound evidence and placed John under arrest whilst they were searching. As they were searching the house, they lifted up the floorboards, went into the crawl space of the house, and found several trenches worth of bodies. In December of 1978, just a few weeks after this missing persons report of Robert Piest, John Wayne Gacy was fully arrested and admitted straight away to murdering over 30 people. 30. That is why he ran out of space in his crawl space and had to start dumping bodies in the local river. Now, all of this could have been prevented if they had kept him in jail for longer. And in 1980, John was charged with 33 murders. Rightly so, he went on to death row. And this is where several documentaries took place with him, and also people documented his story via books. He had managed to get away with this for so long that people were just fascinated with this case, because on one side, he really was the perfect front. He was the perfect businessman in a suburban household, and no one expected him to be able to commit such evil. And then on the other hand, he had killed over 33 people and was found guilty of it. If I don't know what's scary, that is very scary. In the 9th of May 1994, John had his final meal. Now, I find these really interesting to see what people would choose for their final meals. And he decided to have KFC, which I think was a bit of a throwback to where he started to manipulate people, fries, fresh strawberries, as one does, and fried shrimp. This whole last meal was just bizarre, and he also got to meet with his family and say goodbye to them. On that evening, he was taken to the execution room, and over 1,000 people turned up outside of the place where he was being executed to await the final verdict. Now, the process was not smooth, and actually there were complications within the IV given to him. John Wayne Gacy ultimately was executed on that date. A really weird aspect is because he was so much of a sociopath and such an interesting case to the whole of America and also the whole of the world. His brain was actually taken out of his body and donated to Helen Morrison, who was a professor that studied sociopathic tendencies and where this could start from. So his brain is still in her possession, as well as probably other sociopath brains, because there is so much to study there, and he genuinely showed no remorse. But this story is so immensely crazy, and yes, being a clown had pretty much nothing to do with his murders, but you can imagine the media storm that took place as soon as he was arrested, because he was an upstanding person who got away with this all. Do you find this case as creepy as I do? Or would you have suspected this? I mean, what's so heartbreaking about all of this is that the justice system does seem to have failed on several counts here. Now, they shouldn't have let him out early. He was obviously very good at charming people and convincing people that he was good. But they left him out way earlier than they should have. And perhaps if they had let him out later, he would not have found out that he enjoyed killing people. And also, they would have protected many young boys from going through the trauma that they went through. Now, the other failure from the justice system was that the police were notified about John so many times, and they failed to act on this until Robert Piest's family got involved. So this was a really scary case about how someone could get away with so much for so long and never be suspected. What are your thoughts about this case? What do you think is the creepiest part about this? And if you do want to see more cold true crime, cold cases, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell if you want to be notified of videos every single week. I'll see you soon, and I'll speak to you in the comments.